Hi everyone, I'm Michael, and I'm the Senior Director of Products at Apprenda.
And I'm Eric Luskarden, Senior Solutions Engineer here at Apprenda.
Today, we're going to be showing you a demo of how to containerize and modernize an existing application. This is the first in a series of many videos that we call Microlessons by the Container Brothers. Let's get started here by going directly to Google and searching for a very popular .NET application called Blog Engine.
Now you might think, what's the value of downloading this existing application, putting it on the Apprenda platform? And as you'll see throughout the demonstration, any application that's being deployed by the Apprenda platform, whether it's a cloud native new development application or a microservice or one of your existing applications, they're going to inherit a whole set of functionality, things like authentication, scaling, high availability, load balancing. You're going to see all of that in the short demonstration today. But you're also going to get a lot of benefits from an operations point of view, as you have a much better way to manage and operationalize these applications at a greater scale. So let's go ahead and get started with the demo.
Now we went ahead and downloaded Blog Engine, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the zip file here. And I'm going to unzip it so I can open up the Visual Studio project and show you the entire application here. Now you'll notice here that Blog Engine has a ton of files in it. So when we click extract here, we're going to be seeing thousands of files being copied into that directory. This is going to take a few seconds. So I want to complement some of the things Eric said. Traditionally, when you have a .NET application, you go through a development lifecycle that includes building the application, testing and verifying the application, and at the end, you have to go through all the different process and workflow steps to deploy your application in production. All of those steps take a long time and include provisioning storage from the file server team, getting a database together for your application, verifying that you have the necessary network connectivity and load balancing so your application can scale. All those steps take time. And in traditional enterprise, we've seen that they can take anywhere from 2 weeks to even months. With Apprenda, you don't necessarily bypass all those steps, but we can to automate all those steps. So with just a few clicks of a button, as a developer, you get full service capability to upload your application and immediately get it up and running in Apprenda. That's exactly some of the value proposition that we provide to developers.
And not only that, because there's a lot of things that you can do as a developer. If developers have a problem, they'll write code to automate and solve it. But Apprenda takes that one step further. You're not only automating the deployment process, which is very similar to what scripting can do for you, but you're actually abstracting the application from the underlying infrastructure. That way, as a developer, you can iterate over your code much quicker. You can patch your application without having to worry about infrastructure or the state of the infrastructure underneath. And from an operations point of view, your operations team can be patching servers, can be taking them out of commission, bringing them back in. As a developer, you don't even know these things are happening. Your application will continue to run with no downtime. If you needed 3 instances, there are always going to be 3 instances running. So it takes it a lot step further than what scripting can do, because you're not tied anymore to the underlying infrastructure. You now have a completely different paradigm to run and migrate and deploy these applications.
So now our application is already unpacked. So I'm going to go over here to my downloads folder. I'm going to find my Blog Engine download folder. And I'm going to go ahead and open up my file here. Since this was a public download, Visual Studio is warning me that do I think this is safe to go ahead and open Blog Engine? So I'll, of course, say yes here. And essentially, the solution that we have here, Blog Engine, contains is a multi-tier application. It has a database component, as well as the blogengine.net, which is an ASP.NET website, and it also includes some tests here. Now, in order for us to modernize it on Apprenda, there's a couple of changes that we need to make to adapt it for Apprenda, but they're fairly minimal in scope. So the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to the web.config file for the Blog Engine application, and we want to change the Datastore provider that it uses to go from the XML or file system provider to a database that's going to be hosted on Apprenda. So this is the database as a service part of Apprenda, where just by providing us a simple script file, of a database that includes everything from your stored procedures, your schema for your database, as well as some initial data you want. Apprenda will provision that into a full-blown database, and that will be scalable and available to your application, and it's wired in through token replacement.
And this is something that's very important. Part of why we're making this change is not necessarily specific to Apprenda, but any application that you want to deploy in this sort of environment, a file-based system to store from a persistent point of view ties you to a specific server. We have to move the application to a more of a model where the individual website instances can scale, and all of that persistent is still stored in a centralized place, which is what we're going to do here with the SQL Server database. But we're going to be taking advantage of Apprenda's database as a service capability to wire all of that together as a developer, so I don't have to even worry about starting up some database, connection string information, and wiring all of that together. It's going to all be done by the platform.
Exactly. So I'm going to go ahead and delete here this section with the XML block provider, and I'm going to paste here the DB block provider, which essentially says it's going to be using the SQL block provider that's coming out of the Blog Engine core file, and this will essentially utilize SQL. So one of the things that's also necessary to make all of this happen is I need to add some form of way to instruct this application to use the database that includes the specifics about the database. So I'm going to go here under the config sections, and I'm going to paste the connection strings script. And what that does is telling the application to use a connection string called application connection strings with the SQL data system data SQL client provider name. Now, when you deploy this application in Apprenda will do a token replacement, and it will replace this application connection string with the full-blown details of how to connect to your database for your application.
This is a very important aspect, actually, and a lot of the modernization efforts that we've taken to move existing applications to the Apprenda platform leverage these token replacement capabilities. And this is just one of the simple examples when you're moving the database to Apprenda, but there's a whole set of tokens that Apprenda provides, things like URLs for the application so that you're not tied to specific instance names or hosts and ports, different things for file replacement. And even as a developer, you can provide your own set of tokens to Apprenda and pass that in what we call the deployment manifest, which we'll talk about probably in a different video. But in that scenario, you can even generate your own tokens and pass that to Apprenda for replacement at deploy time. So really parameterizing a lot of the deployment scenarios and settings so that your application can even move between environments without really any changes to be made to the actual application.
Exactly. So now we went ahead and build our application. All our code is ready. You know, this was literally 4 lines of code that we added here. Now, one of the features of Blog Engine is that it can support multiple providers for data. So in order for us to utilize the SQL provider, we also need to figure out how do you stand up that SQL database and what are the different table structures, foreign keys, dependencies that it needs. Blog Engine already has created that for us. So if we go to the Blog Engine folder here and we go under setup, SQL Server, there's a setup.sql file that we can use. So I'm going to copy that file here, and I'm going to put that on the root of the folder here. And I'm going to rename it to application provisioning script.sql. Now, Apprenda will be able to detect that name and utilize it as part of our manifest creation. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're deploying a database on Apprenda, you're going to need to provide this sort of script with that well-known name. And as Michael goes through the creation of the actual package for deployment, Apprenda is going to understand that it should use that SQL script as the schema generation script when it deploys the database. And we'll talk about what the actual deployment process looks like once we go through that. But just keep in mind that it is a well-known name that Apprenda identifies as the deployment script for the application. Now, these same capabilities can also be leveraged for Oracle. If your application relies on Oracle instead of SQL Server, you can leverage the same sort of capabilities and token replacement for that database platform as well.
So over here we have the archive, creation of an archive through Visual Studio. You saw we had context within my application. I could right-click on it and say, go ahead and create the archive. I will designate the blogengine.net as the user interface for my application. And it is also the user interface root, meaning that's the entry point for my application. I'm going to ask the archive builder to rebuild before packaging. And notice here that the application provisioning script was already picked up by Apprenda and it's ready to be created. I'm going to click finish here. It's going to take a few seconds. It will rebuild my solution. It will zip the necessary files and produce an archive file for Apprenda. An archive file is really just a well-structured zip file that contains the different folders for the different tiers of my application. For example, a folder for my, let's go ahead and open it as well. We'll have a folder for the interfaces, which is the root, and it contains the ASP.NET project that we have for Blog Engine. And it also has my persistence layer that includes the SQL file that will set up the data structure for my database. Now you can create this file yourself, or you can use Apprenda, and we have many different ways that you can create that. And then I can walk you through some of them.
Absolutely. So the creation of this archive, like Michael showed you, you can use the Visual Studio extension for that. We have a utility called the ACS, which is the command line interface, the Apprenda Cloud Shell that also has a create archive command. You can use the archive builder, which is more of a wizard utility that can walk you through the same process similar to the Visual Studio extension. Or you can even program your build server to package these sort of archives manually. We have documentation that explains what the actual structure needs to look like. Now, if you were deploying other types of applications, so things like Java web applications or Docker containers, Docker images, the structure of the archive is going to be slightly different. You would be including your WAR files instead of course, .NET projects. But it's still always the same idea or structure to be deployed to Apprenda. This becomes the unit of measure of an application when you deploy it on the platform.
So let's go ahead and show you how I can deploy this to the platform. Now, a couple of things. We have a Visual Studio extension that's already built into Visual Studio, so I can get a view of all my applications and walk them through the different life cycles of going from production to new versions of those applications and starting all over again with definition, dev test, and then going again to production. So I get to control all that all from Visual Studio. So I get to have a single tool where I can write my code, create my archives, upload archives on Apprenda, and do some of the day-to-day management on them. However, for the purposes of this demo, we're going to get to use the brand new user interface of Apprenda, and I will get to walk you through deploying our application through that. So here's the user interface for Apprenda. I'm going to click on New here, and we'll call our application called Blog Engine.
And there's many ways to deploy an application on Apprenda as well. Like Michael said, you can use the Visual Studio extension, you can use the command line interface. This whole portal is backed by a REST API that you can leverage yourself as well. We have many customers using that directly, or even build this into your CI/CD pipeline with things like TFS, Jenkins, TeamCity, Urban Code, any other technology that you use for your continuous delivery, your release management. That all can be integrated and use Apprenda as its target platform using either a command line interface or plugins or the REST API directly.
Exactly. So you saw here it only took a total of about 15 or so seconds, and our application is on Apprenda. We have already downloaded the archive, which was the zip file I showed you earlier, and we created a model out of your application. Now we get to show you some of the settings that the application has before we're ready to push it to the dev and test stage called Sandbox. Most important thing I want to show you here is the user access. This is exactly a model that Apprenda can apply to your application that will define how our end user is going to connect to your application. In this case, I'm selecting anyone, meaning I want to give access to anyone that knows the URL for my application to be able to view it. However, Apprenda can allow you to choose authenticated, authorized, or multiple tenants. What those do is we will wire in authentication and authorization into your app without you having to make a single line of change into your application, and immediately your application will inherit characteristics of the platform where authorization, authentication, or multi-tenancy is enforced at the application level.
And this is very, very critical because we have a lot of customers, of course, I'm sure you watching the video are doing the same thing. You have corporate SSO strategies where your organization has decided, We're going to be using this technology for protecting our systems and any application that gets deployed on our platform. And what this can do is if the platform is integrated and protected with those same SSO and identity and access management providers, as a developer, without you having to code that into your application, you can automatically wire that in and have the platform enforce and protect your application with those same technologies without you having to do anything automatically at deploy time. And it's a very, very powerful scenario, because what happens is if you, let's say, a few years down the road decide to change the identity and access management platform that the organization uses, you don't have to go through a migration project of changing every application to use the new system. You rather simply tell the platform, this is the new authentication provider that you're going to use, and every application wired in with these capabilities will be automatically protected by the new system.
So while Eric was talking, I went ahead and promoted my application, and this took a little bit over a minute, and all the 12 steps of the different tasks that are happening during promotion were completed successfully. And we can see here how long it took for Apprenda to run each one of these tasks on our platform. So now that my application is I've been promoted, it is in the sandbox stage, as you can see here up on the top right, and I can go back to the dashboard and I can launch my application and see it in action. So go ahead and launch our application here. And notice that I didn't get an IP address, I didn't get access to a virtual machine. All I got is a URL to my application, and I immediately have my blogengine.net website using a backend data store of Microsoft SQL Server. So I'm gonna go ahead and log in here as an administrator. And I'm not using the Apprenda authentication scheme in this case, I'm using the built-in authentication that blogengine.net has, but I could have used the Apprenda one that, like Eric mentioned earlier, with federated identity back to my ADFS or Active Directory or any other authentication scheme I want to have. So let's go ahead and create a new content here. So I'm going to create a new blog post, and I'm going to call it the demo blog post. And I'm going to call it Containerizing and Modernizing Existing Applications. I'll go ahead and publish this. And if I go back to my dashboard, I saw that I have two published posts, and clicking on them, I can see both the welcome to Blog Engine post as well as the demo blog post that I have. If I'm a developer and I want to see that this actually worked and I was able to modernize this application, I might want to go and look into my data store and see how did things really work. So I can come back to the dashboard of Apprenda, and I'm going to go ahead and tell Apprenda that I would like to access additional controls here. So I can access the Blog Engine database and be able to run some queries against it. So I'm going to click on Cloud Control here. I'm going to click on Data Storage. And I want to do some data management calls from application. So let's go ahead and write the query here and see how our SQL Server was deployed and if I can make calls against this database. So I'm going to go ahead and make a query against the Blog Engine post. And I get back here some results showing the blog post that I just created, as well as the building blog post that comes with Blog Engine. So there you go. We took an existing application, took it directly from GitHub. We opened in Visual Studio. We made 3 or 4 lines of changes. And then after that, within just a few minutes, our app was up and running. And I operated it in a self-service way as a developer. I created my app. I ran it through my dev test stage. And I'm ready to actually even publish it to production. And my app will be ready for its end users to come in and create their own blog posts and be able to utilize the application. Eric, I know that you did some very similar process for one of our big customers lately, where you modernized and containerized a lot of applications.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. And that was really all done because of a couple of things. Number one, the non-requirement of applications on Apprenda to even know that they're running on Apprenda. So the fact that you don't have to go through each one of your applications and refactor them, re-architect them in any way to run on the platform allows you to take a very large percentage of your app portfolio and deploy them really as they are on the Apprenda platform. We talked at the beginning at all the value that you're going to get out of that, the things like the self-service, the load balancing, HA, scalability, all of those things. But we took that to one step further with this customer. We automated the whole process. So you can literally go through your different servers that are running your applications. You can package all of that in an automated fashion and then use our either command line interface or REST API to simply start pushing these applications to the Apprenda platform. And what that customer received is now a portfolio of, we did 71 applications in one day. It's a portfolio of 71 applications running in a cloud environment in a much more modern way, where the operational cost to now running those applications has greatly decreased. They get greater efficiencies, they can patch their applications easier, and they consolidated the infrastructure behind the scenes because Apprenda containerized those apps, and you can run more applications in a smaller footprint of your infrastructure. So there's really just a lot of value in moving these applications to a platform like Apprenda by the mere fact that you don't have to change any of this, and you still get all of these great benefits.
Absolutely. Actually, this is the biggest benefit of containerization, also known as operating system virtualization, where you're running multiple containers on top of the same compute unit. In this case, a container host that's running either a Windows server or a Linux operating system. So when you're running those applications into that, you get a lot of efficiencies you get reduced licensing. You don't want an instance of an operating system running in a virtual machine for every instance of your application up and running. Now you can have many instances of your applications running in containers, getting a lot of the same security and isolation benefits of virtual machines, but sitting on top of the same container host, so you only pay one license of the operating system.
Yeah, not only that, what you also get by having those applications running on Apprenda, they're now automatically abstracted from the infrastructure. So as you notice, Michael didn't have to go choose machines. We don't even know where that application is running in this specific environment. So if the backend, the operations team wants to go ahead and patch the operating system or take some server out of commission for maintenance or troubleshooting or whatever the case may be, the application is simply going to be moved around to another available host without even the knowledge of the developer. The developer, all they told was Apprenda, hey, make sure that I have this number of instances running. Apprenda is going to enforce that that's always the case, regardless of any changes in the infrastructure. If let's say that we deploy this app, Apprenda deploy the app to server 1, and that server went down, the application is now on server 2. Next time Michael goes to patch the app, we'll patch the new instance that's running on server 2 automatically. So it's not going to fail because now the original server is not there anymore. You get a lot of efficiencies. That back and forth of coordinating change windows between developers and operations really goes away at this point, because you can automate the whole process and assure that you have Apprenda in between, making sure that everything is working successfully.
I think that's a good topic for our next webinar, where we can talk about high availability, scaling, resource policies, and all the different benefits that you provide just by running your application on the platform.
Absolutely.
One of the benefits of containers is that when you're running so many of them on top of the same container host, you have less servers to manage. And you're also getting better efficiency out of your existing servers. In fact, a lot of the customers are looking to retire Windows Server 2003 servers that have a very high cost of operating right now, given that the operating system is out of its license and really can't buy support from Microsoft anymore. In those cases, just by bringing your application and modernizing it on Apprenda, like Eric said, you no longer have to worry about the operating system. You get operating system independence. And as your operating systems are going out of life, your application gets migrated to newer container hosts that are maybe running the latest Windows Server operating systems or Linux operating system, and you don't have to worry about any of that. Apprenda will manage the entire infrastructure layer for you, and you get to worry about managing and innovating on your own application. This is a wrap for today. So Eric and I showed you how to modernize and containerize an existing application. This is our new series is called Microlessons by the Container Brothers, and we look forward to seeing you for our next iteration of this webinar.
Thank you very much for listening, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.